All right. So we're going to be right on time today, which I think is a little bit different for us and change the pace as politicians. And just so grateful that everyone was able to make it with the weather. Threw us a little bit of a curveball this morning. I had some grumpy kiddos because school wasn't canceled for them. And of course, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we're gathered on is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Willistogallic people and the beautiful Bountiful River. It's an honor to have some of our special guests here with us, maybe some for the first time to Fredericton area.
No.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. So my name is Jenica Atwin. I am the Member of Parliament for this amazing, beautiful city that we have, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada. And I'm, of course, delighted to be here for such an important announcement. I know it really means so much to our community, alongside Parliamentary Secretary Lisa Hepfner, who is my friend from Ottawa, who's here visiting, Minister Wilson, and Minister Green. And again, the women getting things done. I always love it when it's an all-woman kind of lineup here. So we know that gender-based violence continues to be a problem in New Brunswick, one that takes a physical, psychological, and financial toll on survivors, witnesses, and children. It is a deadly and deep-rooted human rights violation that affects everyone. No one person, government, or organization can achieve success alone. Pour mettre fin à la violence sexiste, nous devons travailler ensemble. We have to do this together. A great example of this work is that both of our governments funded and opening the first on-reserve women's shelter in New Brunswick in Natnoaganag First Nation. And I was honored to be there to be a part of their celebration. I'm so proud that my department, Indigenous Services Canada, as well as the Canada Housing and Mortgage operation, was able to provide funding for this important initiative that will indeed save lives. J'espère que le travail mené dans le cadre du plan d'action national pour mettre fin à la violence fondée sur le sexe donnera lieu à d'autres réussites comme celle-ci, car nous savons qu'il est très important de soutenir le travail de ce secteur. I'm hopeful that the work under the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence will produce more success stories like this one, because we know that supporting this sector's work is so important. The National Plan will help New Brunswick give the frontline organizations located here in Fredericton and everywhere in New Brunswick a helping hand to provide additional critical services within our communities. Ultimately, this new funding will help the victims and survivors of gender-based violence and their families, and help address gender-based violence within our communities. I would have liked to welcome Elder Jean Barty-Bogue with us this morning, but the weather has kept her away. So she's with us in spirit this morning. She was going to do an offering and a prayer. So we'll just make sure that we thank her, but we're going to move on. So next up, I have Lisa Hepfner, who is our Parliamentary Secretary, as I mentioned, to the Minister for Women, Youth, and Gender Equality. And it's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your warm welcome, Jenica. I can't say enough how well represented you are in Ottawa with your Member of Parliament, Jenica Atwin. Not only is she an extraordinary, fierce advocate for Indigenous people, for climate change, she's, a fierce advocate as a mother of two adorable children I've had the pleasure to meet. And so I just wanted to say thank you for welcoming me here to Fredericton. Not my first time. I have to say I'm a big fan of this town, but it is lovely to be back here for this announcement. And I would also like to thank particularly the Muriel McQueen Ferguson Center for Family Violence and Research here at the University of New Brunswick. Thank you for offering us this space and letting us be here to make this announcement today. And I was also disappointed that the elder couldn't be with us this morning, but hopefully you'll pass on my regards and that I'm sorry that she couldn't be here with us today. And of course, it's been my pleasure this morning to meet the provincial ministers, Jill Green for Social Development, Housing, let me get this right, Social Development and Housing and Economic and Social Inclusion, is that right? Thank you, Jill. And Minister Sherry Wilson, who's our counterpart here from the Women and Gender Equality, the Minister for Women's Equality here in New Brunswick. Thank you so much for making it through the snow to be here with us today. So for those who don't know, we are now in the midst of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And the theme this year is Listen, Learn, Act. Écouter, apprendre, act. And the announcement we're making here today really embodies that theme, because today is the result of listening to service providers and the others involved in the fight against gender-based violence. We have been learning about what survivors need and how we can prevent violence, and we have been taking action through our historic national plan. We have to remember that gender-based violence is not simply a physical act. It's not only physical acts, it's also emotional, financial, and mental tolls that survivors and their families carry for the rest of their lives. Le travail est fait par des personnes en première ligne pour aider les personnes survivantes et leurs familles à rebâtir leur vie. This work we are doing in collaboration with provinces and territories is for the people working on the front lines, helping survivors and families rebuild their lives. This work is also about how we bring men and boys into this conversation. How do we break those generational cycles of violence? Because it's unacceptable that 11 million people in Canada say they have been sexually or have experienced intimate partner violence at least once since the age of 15. The historic 10-year plan is our commitment to preventing and addressing gender-based violence while we support provincial and territorial governments in their work with victims and survivors, with Indigenous partners, direct service providers, experts, advocates, municipalities, the private sector, and researchers. And we are so thankful for our provincial and territorial partners like New Brunswick, which are doing this work with us, because the federal government can't do this work alone. Addressing gender-based violence must be done in each jurisdiction in a way that responds to their unique challenges and needs. And this strong collaboration brings us to today's milestone. So today, I am proud to announce a federal contribution of more than $16.3 million over 4 years for the government of New Brunswick to support the implementation of the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. Now, this response includes at least 25% of funding going towards increasing prevention efforts, in keeping with our plan's 3 federal priorities: increasing prevention efforts, reaching underserved and at-risk populations, and stabilizing the gender-based violence sector. In New Brunswick, this means partnering with the provincial government to develop and implement culturally appropriate services for Indigenous communities, for local communities, for 2S LGBTQIA+ people, women with disabilities, survivors of human trafficking and their families, youth et les services en français. Cela contribuera également à soutenir les initiatives de prévention et de sensibilisation existantes axées sur la prévention de la violence avant qu'elle ne se produise. It will also help to expand existing prevention and outreach initiatives that focus on preventing violence before it occurs. This significant investment builds on the work that our government announced earlier this year to provide critical support to crisis hotlines. And I also want to highlight work that both of our governments are funding. I think Jenica already mentioned it. It includes the first on-reserve women's shelter in New Brunswick opening next year. And I'm so proud that we're able to work alongside the province on this important initiative. It will save lives. Thank you to all the frontline organizations doing this work in New Brunswick and across the country. Your work is very meaningful. You are changing lives and saving lives. And I want to just thank you. Vous changez des vies et sauvez des vies. Merci. And all of us here today know that by combining our efforts, we can put an end to this cycle of violence. So poursuivons cette collaboration parce que les Canadiens comptent sur nous. Thank you, New Brunswick, for being wonderful hosts and for welcoming us to your province and for welcoming us to Fredericton. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you so much, PS Hepfner. You know, and no matter how many times I stand before our amazing community, I still get nervous a little bit. You know, my words weren't coming out, but once we start talking about those millions, it all just kind of melts away. So now we're rolling here. But I also do want to acknowledge some of our incredible partners who are in the room with us. You know, as we both mentioned, we cannot do this without you. It's incredible to see everyone come together, this network that's been built, and then of course to have the resources to back up your important work. I also noticed we have the police here as well. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for being here. So let's keep the good times rolling, and we'll invite our provincial partners now with us. It's my honor, as always, to invite Minister Jill Green, the Minister of Everything we like to joke about, Minister of Social Development, Minister responsible for the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation, and Minister responsible for New Brunswick Housing Corporation. Minister Green, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jenica, and I'm so happy to be here. This week is a heavy week for female engineers. We have the Day of Remembrance on Wednesday, so I'm really happy to be here to talk about something very positive on those fronts. So, you know, gender-based violence is something that concerns all of us. And as a government, I can tell you we don't treat it as a single department issue. And that's why I'm so happy to be here with my friend, Minister Wilson, to make this announcement with our great federal counterparts. And my friend Jenica, because we've certainly had some time to get to know each other very well over all these announcements together and trying to get some really neat things done here in this region. And, you know, by working together, that's how we can begin to solve some of the problems and issues we have in front of us. Addressing gender-based violence takes efforts from across provincial and federal governments. And that's what we're seeing here today. It's teamwork to really move some mountains. And that's why it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Minister Wilson. I've worked with her at the cabinet table, and I can tell you she is someone who is so passionate about making a difference in the lives of New Brunswickers. She's someone who has committed her time to the cause of helping victims long before she got into politics. I can't think of anyone better to be working with on this file than Sherry Wilson, the Minister responsible for women's equality. She knows how to engage her colleagues to move the needle. And more importantly, she cares deeply about ensuring the safety of the people of New Brunswick. So I'd like you to please join me in welcoming Minister Wilson to the podium.
Well, thank you, Minister Green, for that very kind introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi. Thank you for the kind introduction again. And I tell you that Minister Green is just as passionate about her commitment to the people of New Brunswick. We're very proud of you and the work that you're doing. So very committed. Thank you, Parliamentary Secretary Atwin and Parliamentary Secretary Hepfner, for being here for this important announcement today. Thank you for the partnership on this agreement between the governments of New Brunswick and Canada. And thank you also to the staff of the Muriel McQueen Ferguson Center for Family Violence Research for hosting us here today. It is fitting we're here at an organization that promises interdisciplinary research and are aimed at understanding, treating, and preventing family violence and violence against women and children. I appreciate the work and the partnership with this center. Thank you to service providers, frontline workers in the community and in government, and anyone else affected by this. You've been waiting for more change, and this agreement will certainly help. Gender-based violence and violence against gender-diverse people is pervasive and continuous, despite ongoing efforts to stop it. And it's happening in New Brunswick. It has no borders. Countries all over the world acknowledge the necessity of eliminating gender-based violence. We recently marked November 25th, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the beginning of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, ending on December 10th, Human Rights Day, and on Wednesday, December 6th, the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. We will be remembering that day in 1989 when 14 women were killed at École Polytechnique in Montreal for being women in a field traditionally reserved for men. Statistics tell part of the story. Statistics Canada recently reports on gender-based violence. It's not a secret. The evidence indicates that most incidents of violence are never reported, not to police or healthcare professionals, rarely to family and friends. Therefore, we know the statistics show only a snapshot of what is really happening in the public and private spaces of New Brunswick. The National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence is a comprehensive and strategic framework developed jointly by federal, provincial, and territory governments, nonprofit organizations, and experts in the field. Its primary goal is to eradicate gender-based violence in all its forms. It's a multi-pronged approach that seeks to not only respond to incidents of violence, but also to prevent them from happening in the first place. This transfer agreement will fund New Brunswick's implementation of the National Action Plan that represents $16.3 million over 4 years. It will enhance supports to survivors and organizations across the province in providing crucial, life-saving support, services, and information. Priorities are increasing prevention efforts, reaching underserved and or most at risk, and stabilizing the gender-based violence sector. With this investment, New Brunswick will be able to fund agencies to offer therapeutic counseling to survivors, deliver specialized training for justice systems, social services, and health personnel, provide funding to gender-based violence service organizations, coordinate prevention and awareness campaigns, enhance healthy relationship school curriculum programming, support programming for children exposed to domestic violence, enhance and expand prevention programming for individuals who cause harm, and fund initiatives to address violence against Indigenous women and girls and the 2S LGBTQ2IA plus people. This funding will further help in the work the government is already doing. Here's just an example of initiatives in New Brunswick. Funding to transition houses, second stage housing, and domestic violence outreach, support delivery of tools and resources to address domestic violence in the workplace. We introduced the Intimate Partner Violence Intervention Act, providing remedies to victims of intimate partner violence by the issuance of an emergency intervention order to help enhance the safety and stability of victims. We rolled out community coordinated response for high risk, high danger domestic intimate partner violence. Expansion of Love Shouldn't Hurt campaign, funding and rollout of community-based sexual violence services across 13 communities, convened a ministers' roundtable on campus sexual violence, which led to the creation of 2-year campus sexual violence advisor at Women's Equality in 2023. Developed and released Weaving Our Voices Together, New Brunswick Path for Safety of Indigenous Women, Girls, and the 2S LGBTQAI plus people. Funding for Indigenous Sexual Violence Coordinator at Sexual Violence MB, and for Indigenous Domestic Violence Outreach Services in 11 First Nations communities. This agreement builds on the province of New Brunswick's own efforts, which include more than $9 million in support for initiatives to address gender-based violence. We're pleased to have the federal government commit to support our efforts and those of our partners to ensure women and girls can live lives free of violence. We are hopeful that these investments will reduce the incidence of gender-based violence and improve responses to victims and survivors. New Brunswick's plan has been informed and shaped by community stakeholders and representatives in government departments. Empowering gender-based violence survivors is so important. We must listen to their stories, amplify their voices, and provide the resources they need. And that is why we're here today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Minister Wilson. And you know, the National Action Plan is not to address gender-based violence, it's to end it. And it can seem like a pretty daunting task, but you've just given such practical examples of some of the incredible work that's already underway that is absolutely making a difference in the lives of families across this province. And we're not going to stop there. So, you know, even though it's a heavy discussion and it certainly affects us all in different ways, I think there's a light that we can really turn to, and we can see that there is a better tomorrow for those generations to come after us. And I think that means the world to us. I also love, again, seeing New Brunswick and Canadian flags together. That's what everybody wants to see, us working together to solve these problems. And thank you also, Minister Green, for mentioning December 6th in Ecole Polytechnique. I always recount, the story of my first time speaking actually in the House of Commons on behalf of our beautiful riding. And it was on December 6th, was the first time I was able to speak. It was in ministerial replies. So every day on December 6th, we had the Prime Minister and different leaders of our different parties and a bipartisan support to end gender-based violence. And the first time I rose in that house, I was shaking like a leaf. I was so scared. I had kind of that imposter syndrome, but I knew, that speech was so important to speak to the survivors, to speak to their families, and to speak to this important issue. And it was really the strength of Fredericton that came through me that day. And it just, continues to give me that motivation to keep going. So thank you for just being an amazing community. I'm so lucky to represent Fredericton. So that brings our the formal part of this event to a close, and we will have now time for media availability. So thank you so much for being here. We'll even, merci. So Sean Berry, I think, is going to help us with our media outreach. Putting you on the spot.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to proceed to questions from the media. We're going to take questions in the room first, and after that, we'll take calls from online. Donc, on va maintenant procéder à des questions des médias. On prendra des questions qui sont dans la salle en premier. Après ça, on prendra des appels des médias qui nous joignent en ligne. So if you could please identify yourself first and your question. Thank you. Ali?
Yes. Actually, that is not the case at all. When we took government in 2018, we saw that some of the women and the sectors where they worked were not receiving the salary that they should have. So we recognized the importance of economic security for women. So we took action right away, and we actually raised those funds. Like the salaries that they're getting now is quite different from what they were getting in 2018. For public sector, but also for other salaries too, for the people that work in the childcare sector, for daycare, early childhood education, those salaries were raised as well. Are you talking about the private sector? We've been working all along. The Women's Equality Branch has been working all along to provide modules for the private sector to look at ways they can increase. And right now there's 785 different private businesses that have looked at those modules, and there's 30 that have taken them on. So there's work being done in the private sector as well. And today, with everybody looking for employees, it's important that they keep the competition from taking their employees. So to me, it's a non-issue because people are raising those salaries to keep their employees. I think this is something that's been worked on all along. So this is something that's happening.
I understand there are two questions online. I'm just going to get the names. Okay. Natalie Sturgeon from Global New Brunswick, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, my voice is a little cracky because I've been sick, but I wondered about the housing component here. Obviously, housing is a challenge for everybody, but it will be also in particular for women or domestic violence victims leaving their situation to find adequate housing, but also affordable housing. I wonder if you could tell me if there's any imminent plan to deal with that as part of the action plan.
Hi, Natalie. It's Jill Green, Minister of Social Development and Housing for New Brunswick. And yes, we are certainly looking at how we can assist victims of domestic violence to find housing as they're leaving their abuser. One of the pieces of the Housing for All strategy includes $22 million putting towards a direct-to-tenant benefit, and they would be eligible for that, and we would help them find second stage housing. Social development also funds transition homes, and so some of these funds will be put towards that as well. So it's definitely being considered and taken care of, and we're putting the money to help with that as well.
And just in terms of the transit, like transition houses are great, but most people would be looking for a permanent solution. So you're saying that the 22 million is for a subsidy of some kind for rent?
Yes, it's $22 million that's being put towards a direct-to-tenant rental benefit, where we subsidize the rent for individuals. In this case, would be fleeing domestic violence situations, so that they would pay no more than 30% of their household income towards rent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Natalie, it's Jenica Atwin. I just want to add to that too. So just for our local community here, we do have the Rapid Housing Initiative that we're still getting shovels in the ground, increasing our stock. We're waiting for a possible announcement imminently on the Housing Accelerator Fund as well. We did mention some of the emergency shelters that are in place, and we're working on right now. There's funding open for second stage housing. So it's all about the kind of wraparound services. And of course, housing is essential in that piece. So there's a lot of good news, I hope, also coming around that as well. Thank you. Okay.
Barbara Simpson, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. So this is for Minister Wilson. I guess, what has the level of consultation been with, service providers here when it action plan?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
You broke up there. Could you repeat your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, what is the level of consultation been so far with service providers in New Brunswick as it relates to the action plan?
Well, I think the women's equality branches work consistently with them, with the different service providers. To what extent, I can't tell you that. I don't have the answer to that, but I do know that our women's branch is quite active in working with service providers.
I guess, is there any additional money that the provincial government will be putting forward in partnership with the federal government with the National Action Plan?
Oh, absolutely. We're really proud of this announcement today. We've already put $9 million into the action plan. So this year will just help over 4 years to build on what we've already done.
Will there be anything more in upcoming budgets? Is the 9 million, I guess, for this past fiscal year? Or?
Well, the 9 million was there, and this just adds to it. And this will go to help our transition houses and a number of things that were previously mentioned.
Thank you.
No other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks, everyone.